Welcome to Being Humankind with your hosts Brian, Mike, and Neely. We explore what it means to be human in a time of disconnection.
If you could have lunch with anyone, past or present, who would it be?
Past or present? Lunch. Well, you know, there's the filmmakers that have inspired me, like Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, you know, John Cassavetes, who's not around anymore, Billy Wilder, like, you know, Charlie Chaplin. These are people I would like to not only just meet them because of how they've inspired me, but also because of the way they've pushed the moving image and storytelling forward, and kind of picking their brain and understanding what that really was like the obstacles that they had to go through in being front runners, if you will, in creating something out of nothing. And I think that especially those early filmmakers, right? Because if you look at their work, I mean, it's like mind-boggling that they were able to figure it out without anything to look back on, right? Like to really get, especially like the comedic filmmakers like Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, like without previous films to look at or a book to read or a class to take, they were just vaudeville actors. And they said, well, let's put the camera here, shoot it, building falling, I go through the window. Like that to me it's a stroke of genius. And that's something that I would like to understand from a perspective of never seen it, having seen it before, being pioneers, if you will. And on the list, there's I don't like there's many people I'd like to meet, but nobody in particular I say, if I meet this person, it would be the end of it. I wouldn't have to meet anybody else. I think that there's, you know, Julio Cesar Chavez, a Latino human rights activist from Texas and Southern California, like that I've studied his work and I've been interested in him. But then I was just reading a book on one of the first outlaws that was a Mexican named Tiburcio Vasquez. And I go, wow, like meeting this guy would be interesting because he was like this Robin Hood-esque character back in the Wild West that nobody really talks about. Nobody knows in the history books, but he was this like hardcore Mexican bandit, right? But I mean, and obviously like Jack Kerouac, I mean, come on. Mr. Jack Kerouac would be definitely on the top of the list to just get the essence of that soul and that spirit, you know. I remember going to Lowell to what was it, the anniversary, they had a what do you have out there, Mike? Do they still have it, the Jack Kerouac like retreat? No, they don't.
I don't know.
It was around his birthday, and we went out there, and I met Sampas, his brother-in-law, which I didn't know it was his brother-in-law until after he had left, and we looked him up. But he was wearing one of Kerouac's belts, he was telling us. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting, right? Like to have a piece of clothing that one of like your literary idols, like Hemingway, can you imagine owning a flannel that Hemingway wore? Boots that Hemingway went hunting on? Like that's crazy. Like to me, then it got me in love with that idea of collecting artifacts from these individuals, because then it's you know, something that some flannel shirt that Kerouac just vomited on that he didn't care about, you know, from the Goodwill. Now you're like, oh, now you're like, what is that backpack, right? I think they have the backpack at the Lowell Museum of his travels. Like, wow, to wear that just to get a sense of what he was going through as he crossed the United States of America and meeting these characters. Like, I mean, so that essence of that individual and meeting them, of course, would be one for me that I would appreciate highly, but it wouldn't probably be the end all be all. And I think we meet them not just through their writing, right? But by visiting those places that they once lived in and haunted. And you start to get a sense of who they are, and the kind of spirit that they were in their travels, and what they were writing about, and how different it was for him to go to San Francisco for the first time in the early 50s and meet those characters, and then travel down to Big Sur. Like that would be an interesting discussion to have with him. So yeah, those are the several that I would want to meet, but not one hardcore individual.
So you couldn't put your finger on one for one lunch tomorrow afternoon?
Yeah, well, Jack Kerouac, if you put a gun in my head. And you know, I could be symbolic and be like, well, you know, I never met my grandfather on both sides of my family. And I've always, my grandfather on my dad's side was murdered. So it's interesting to hear my dad's side of the story on that, because my dad was like 17, 18 years old when this happened. And my dad was the one that found him out in a field. And then hearing my mom's side of the story, where it's like, well, supposedly your grandfather murdered some other guy and this was revenge. I'm like, what? I'm like, that's like a movie right there. Like, so in thinking about this question again, see, the more time I have to think about it, I could get more, it gets more rich, I think, with the idea, if I were able to meet my grandfather and sit with him and have dinner and kind of assess the bloodline that I come from, that I've never met before, and understanding those stories about him, or knowing those stories about him, I think it would make an interesting dinner conversation. Right? But yeah. So, all right. So I'll be a good family man and say my grandfather.
So that's interesting. We've been, ever since we had the priest on, who had popped up with movies, and we were talking about Coco. I don't know if you've seen the Disney movie Coco.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I have not seen it, and I want to see it.
It's hugely symbolic, and I just got Mike to watch it. Neely's still slow, but essentially it's based on the Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
And once somebody that's passed over is no longer remembered, then they're gone forever. Now you had mentioned having a Mexican American background. Is that something your family would celebrate, or?
Oh yeah, the Day of the Dead. Yeah, it's cultural. It's November 1st. Yeah, they go to the cemeteries. I mean, many dress up. They do it here in LA. They go to the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. It's actually a whole weekend, and they dress up. They paint their faces, kind of like the cartoon does.
Yeah.
They dress up the gravestones also. Like if you have relatives there, like you walk by. So it's like a big, like almost like a flea market, but not. But it's for the November 1st Day of the Dead celebration of honoring or not forgetting, you know, your dead relatives and friends. And it's a big deal in the Latin community. Death is a big deal in the Latin community for some, well, religious reason, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I whenever I've gone to funerals in Mexico, it's like they pray for 9 days. They have the body out for 2-3 days. Everybody walks to the cemetery in this little town that my parents are from. Like it's a big deal. And even I would even joke with my mom. I'm like, Mom, when you go, is this how you want it? 9 days of people wailing and praying, and she just shrugs her shoulders, like, yeah, this is what it is. This is how we're supposed to go. Like, what are you gonna do? I'm like, wow, that's like, and then a year later, you come back and do it for like 5 days. And if you don't come back a year later, it really shows how little disregard you had for that relative of yours, especially if it was like a mother, father, brother, sister, you know, or grandparent. Like, it's interesting. It's really interesting. But anyways, you were going about the movie?
Well, that's kind of where I was going. I mean, it just, the culture is fascinating, you know, in the variations of tradition, I guess. So it just popped in my head that you being our first Mexican American guest, that I would throw it out there and see if that was something your family did. And
yeah,
they do. So the movie's right.
Yeah, the movie's right. I just saw Onward, and it also kind of deals with grief and loss and bringing back the dead in a more magical, level. Have you guys seen that one?
Yep.
Yeah.
Got
So
a 4-year-old, so I've seen them all.
Yeah, I could imagine. That one, it was good. It was great. I don't think it was great, but it was good. It was good.
Yeah, it was okay. Another good one is Soul. I don't know if you've seen Soul.
It's on my queue to watch it. Yeah, I got to see it.
That's another really.
I've heard a lot of good things. I saw writer. Ryan,
You froze.
He froze.
Oh, do you have the Disney Plus app, Ryan?
I do.
They have a behind the scenes with the writer of that, and it's interesting to hear him talk about it and his process as to writing it. If you get a chance, watch it. Watch his behind the scenes, like 3 minutes. But I thought, wow, like I definitely want to see it now. But that's also about death. Damn, Disney's like all about dying.
Yeah.
Some time for the pandemic.
I know, right? Like might as well prepare you for loss, kids, because this is the reality.
It's interesting to see how there's so many variations in how the cultures do it. Now they've made it so you're educating kids essentially without them even knowing it, right? You become accustomed to, the Mexican culture by watching Coco, and it's a positive to me, really.
Sure, I think yeah, and I think culturally they make it, even though like for the Day of the Dead they're dressed like, they paint themselves like skeletons and things like that. It's supposed to be meant as a positive thing. And at first I was always questioning, like, isn't that scary? Like, why do you want to scare people I've always felt that grief was a very private thing, and to celebrate it was very awkward as I was growing up. But the more I learned about it, the more I appreciated the fact that there was no shame in celebrating the life of others that have left you. And that's what I do when somebody passes away, especially in the lodge, right? Like it's really a celebration of their lives and not this sullen, depressing, let's all sit and wail about some individual. Let's have us a good cry about what a great human being we were able to be in contact with for this finite time that we are alive on this planet, and celebrate that.
Absolutely.
I guess maybe that's tied up in the fact that you want to come back, like that they allegedly will come back during that time period. So like, who's gonna want to come back if you're all hanging out being sad, right? Like,
Right, exactly.
That's one way to look at it.
Let's celebrate you. So you're like, unless you don't like, well, if you don't like the individual, you're just like not gonna even be around, right? But it's interesting. It's interesting how different cultures celebrate it, and even in Masonry, the way we deal with it. So it's cool. It's an understanding of it and not a fear of it, like many people. I mean, nobody wants to die, but I think the more open you are to the fact that you are, and that should motivate you to live the best life that you could live, right? That should motivate, knowing that you're only here for, if you're lucky, 100 years. That's not a lot of time, right? Maybe when we were kids it felt like a lot of time, but now that we hit our 40s, soon 50s, then we're like, ooh, not a lot of time. It's a lot more work that needs to get done. Will I get it done?